Elementary OS 8 is going to be released today or is already out depending on when I publish this and when you watch it. And you might not know it, but Elementary OS is the distribution that started this channel. The first few videos I made were only about this system. It was the first one to have a competent app store, a good app ecosystem, an actual strategy to push good apps with a development platform. It was the first one to have good touchpad gestures before all other desktops, and then they got passed by everybody else. But Elementary OS 8 is here, and it brings a lot of changes compared to EOS 7, at least in the scope of an Elementary OS desktop. So we're gonna take a look at everything here, and we're gonna take a look at our sponsor. So this video is sponsored by Proton Mail. You already know about all they do. They're an end-to-end encrypted and zero-access encrypted suite of services, including an email address. They're focused on privacy and security, and a Proton Mail account comes with a lot of extra services like a calendar, contacts, a VPN, some online storage space, and a password manager. And all of this comes with the usual Proton encryption. Everything is open source, and I use all of them for my own personal email, calendars, contacts, VPN, and stuff like that. Of course, the account is free, and they have paid plans to get more storage space, more features, and speaking of those paid plans, you can get some pretty stellar Black Friday deals, with up to 60% off your Proton Mail Plus plan, coming in at €1.99 or dollar per month for a 12-month subscription instead of $3.99. And this includes 15 gigs of storage, 10 email addresses, the desktop app, and more. And you can also get Proton Unlimited for $6.49 per month for a 12-month subscription instead of $12.99. And this comes with 500 gigs of storage. So if you wanted to give a good try to Proton Mail, now is the time. They even have an easy import tool to grab all your data from other accounts and import it automatically into Proton. Of course, you can click the link in the description to get access to all these nice deals. Okay, so the first big thing Elementary OS 8 adds is the Wayland Session, the all-important Wayland Session. So what you can do at the login screen is get access to two different sessions. There's a secure session and a classic one. The classic session is basically X11 as you know it. They redeveloped a bunch of tools, but it's still the one you know. Secure session, however, is the Wayland Session, and this relies on permissions and portals to let you control which apps can or cannot do. And it also comes with a mixed DPI mode that lets you do scaling differently on a per display basis. As far as I could tell, trying this on a VM and on an actual computer, there is still no fractional scaling. Elementary OS dev repeatedly said that they don't believe in it, so you don't have it. What you have instead is a font slider scale, which not only increases the size of the fonts, but also of a lot of controls in various apps, meaning it sort of acts like fractional scaling, but without using more GPU power. It doesn't work as well for every app though. Now, of course, the main benefit of a Wayland Session is all the system of permissions that you can get. These are Flatpak's permissions, but you also have permissions through portals, which are only available in the Wayland Session. So there's a color picker. This uses a portal to authorize the use of color picking and to simplify it. So of course you don't have to say yes to every time you try to color pick, but at least the system passes the color. The application doesn't have a right to read every single pixel on your screen. You also have a portal to record your display. Same as when you use OBS on GNOME or KDE, you will have a screen sharing portal that allows an application to record your screen without actually having access to your entire screen. It's the system passing it to it, but no app can just record everything they want as they want. Same goes for screenshots. Now, the default session is still the classic one, the X11 session. Wayland is not the default here, and that's mainly because accessibility is still much better on X11 compared to what it is on Wayland, so they're still defaulting to X11. It's also their first time having a Wayland session, so I would expect them to be maybe a little adverse to putting that first in the hands of everyone. I think this decision is fair. I like the terminology, the classic session for X11, the secure session for Wayland. I think it reflects well the current advantages of both. I do wish Elementary was a bit more adventurous and pushed the Wayland session as the default one, especially because it would help them gather all the bug reports and problems that they need to make that session actually good. But also, Elementary OS is a pretty small project, and maybe getting flooded by thousands of bug reports on day one of offering this new release is not such a great idea for them. Now, in terms of the desktop itself, the dock has been completely rewritten here. You wouldn't be able to tell by just looking at it, but it does have plenty of cool features. So first, you can middle-click on an app's icon to open a new window for every single application that supports this. So for example, non-multi-window apps will not work with that, but applications that do support multi-window, like for example the file manager, they will. If you have multiple windows of the same app open, now clicking on its icon will just spread those windows out. And if you have only one window open for one application, clicking on its icon will automatically focus it no matter which virtual desktop it is on, so it will auto-switch desktops for you. Now the dock also supports using super plus a number to automatically open an application. So you can press, for example, here it's super plus 3 to focus or open a web browser. If I use super plus 7, I'm going to open here this application, the sound player. This is a feature that virtually every other desktop has had for the longest time, so Elementary getting it is actually pretty good. And of course, you still have all the gestures that you would expect to go to the multitasking view, adding virtual desktops, opening windows, moving them from desktop to desktop, and stuff like that. So you can obviously just move things around in the multitasking view, you can create new desktops, you can move windows from one desktop to another. You have the usual gestures that work just as well as they did on X11, if not slightly better. I found them less buggy on Wayland than they were on X11, because the multitasking view on X11 tended to have problems. It doesn't really on Wayland. And looking at this multitasking view, you might have noticed that now the background is no longer a drab gray thing. What it is actually now is a blurred version of your wallpaper. So if you go, let's go back to the Elementary OS 7 wallpaper, for example. If we go to the multitasking view, we have a nice blurry version of that wallpaper instead of the ugly gray that we used to have. It's the same thing on the login screen, and it is much better. The top panel also now has a bunch of quick settings. They're mostly for accessibility. You have the screen reader, on-screen keyboard, dark mode, and of course the slider for the size of the fonts, which also changes obviously not just the fonts but also the UI elements, which kinda replaces what you could get in fractional scaling, as we've seen. You also get all the usual settings and logout buttons here. All the other indicators are still there, so the one for sound, the one for network, the one for notifications. They haven't changed since their latest Elementary OS 7 implementation. These things get updated over time in Elementary OS, so EOS 7 users already had access to that, and they haven't really changed in Elementary OS 8 either, even on the Wayland session. And no system tray icons are still not there because they don't think they're needed, GNOME doesn't think they're needed, so they're never gonna add those back unless the entire direction of the project changes. There was a trick to reinstall them in EOS 7, I'm pretty sure that's still gonna work in EOS 8 as well. Now another change is the super key now opens the app menu by default, just like on every other normal operating system, apart maybe from macOS where the super key does nothing, I think. Don't quite remember. I think it does nothing by default. Previously it opened the keyboard shortcuts layer. Now it's the app menu. Much more normal for a lot of people. Of course, you can still change this to re-enable the shortcut overlay or bring the multitasking view instead of the apps menu. You decide how things work here. Now finally, the cursor theme has been changed. As you might see, I made it voluntarily huge so you can see it more clearly. It's refined a little bit. You get colors now when you launch stuff, when the system is busy. I think it looks good. It looks a bit cartoonish, maybe a bit childish, maybe too rounded, but I don't think it's bad per se. I think it's a fine evolution, at least when you put it back to normal sizes. it just looks okay, it looks fine, it's fine. Now, I know some people just do not like how Elementary OS looks or feels, they don't like the GTK theme that they use, they don't like the icons. Personally, I think the dark theme, at least, still holds up pretty well. It's not the best out there, but it still works fine. The icons, I really like. They retain that skeuomorphism look that has been lost on every other desktop. I really like it. I wish more operating systems leaned on that side again. I think the time for the flat, one-color, almost monochrome icon is long past. We need to go back to more evocative stuff that looks like real-life objects. Let's bring back a connection between the digital world and real objects. It's time for skeuomorphism to come back. Now let's talk applications. The first big change is that you now have FlatHub enabled by default in Elementary OS. Elementary OS defaulted to Flatpak as its only main app distribution format. I applaud this change. This is what most people should use for desktop graphical apps. I'm not talking about libraries, I'm talking about graphical apps. Flatpak is the future. Every distro at some point, every app developer will rely on Flatpak if they can, because it is just the most convenient format for almost everybody to distribute, download, install, and update an application. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. So Elementary OS is using that, and previously you only had apps that came from the Elementary OS App Center. This meant you had about 150 apps, most of those were single-purpose one, and you simply did not have any web browser, any Office suite, anything really that useful. And now you do. And of course, since you now get a lot more Flatpaks, you also get a lot more permissions, meaning you can tweak all the applications, all the Flatpaks permissions straight inside of the settings. Now this also means that you're no longer getting the curated apps, you're getting the made for Elementary OS apps, meaning these applications are apps that follow Elementary OS's guidelines, as in they're gonna use the right theme, they're gonna use the right icons and the right kind of widgets and look and feel. GNOME apps and Elementary OS apps look really similar in how they embrace the header bar, a unique app menu, stuff like that, but there are a few small differences, especially in the theme department. So for example, a version of an app in the App Center and a version of the same app on FlatHub will not look the same. The app from FlatHub will look like a GNOME app, the version from the App Center might look like an Elementary OS app, which is what you might want to get instead. Now, in the App Center as well, app pages have been improved just a little bit. You now have more links and they're better laid out. You can get nice little colorful icons to get to the various links and web pages to support a developer or just to look at the license and the work that they've done. Now, the App Center only handles app and runtime updates now. All the system updates are now handled through the system settings in the System tab. You now have these updates and you can turn on automatic updates, so downloads will be done in the background. All system updates, operating system updates, not app updates happen in the background and you just close and reopen an app and you get the new version. But system updates, they will require a restart. They're all offline updates. Some people don't like it. It's much safer to only update libraries in between reboots instead of changing a library version from under an application that might be running. It creates much less problems. It's less convenient, but in the end, it's just better. And on a desktop, you really don't care about rebooting whenever you want. And of course, you can also decide to reboot without applying updates if you don't want to apply those right now. Now, as per the default Elementary OS apps, if you use Elementary OS 7, you will not get any change here. And that's because these applications are Flatpaks, and so you already have their latest version on EOS 7 and on EOS 8, they're the same. Which means that these release notes for EOS 8 are much shorter than they could have been, but you also still have a few changes. For example, you have a font viewer that has been redesigned and looks a bit better than it used to. I'm pretty sure it's the GNOME font viewer, GNOME project, GNOME 47. So it's the GNOME font viewer. You also have a GNOME Web 46, not 47. Not sure why you don't get the latest version. It's an okay browser, but I would never use that over Firefox in any situation. The default Elementary OS apps are competent enough, but I think GNOME apps have now passed them in terms of the number of features and the settings that they offer. It doesn't mean that EOS apps are bad, they are perfectly serviceable, they look good, they have most of the options that most people will ever need, but if you're looking for KDE-style applications, that's not what you're gonna find here. Hopefully, since they're all flat-packed, you will get rolling updates to them as the lifecycle of EOS 8 evolves, because that's kind of the model. You get updates to the desktop in a rolling fashion. You don't need to wait for EOS 9 to get desktop updates and application updates. Now, the settings received a few changes as well. First, there's now this sort of dual pane layout that happens in a few more places than usual. I think it looks good. It's like every other settings page does it on every other desktop. It's fine, it works. I think it's a competent settings manager. Now, in the appearance settings, you can also decide to disable the overlay scroll bars, meaning that these pesky scroll bars will stay visible at all times instead of having to reach for them and try to find them all the time. I personally like overlay scroll bars, but some people really don't, and so at least you have the option to enable or disable those. In the language settings, you have the option to automatically pick the temperature unit based on your locale. Power settings are now more complete. You can obviously choose between power modes, but if you have a device that works on battery, you can also elect to select a specific power profile when you're plugged in or when you're on battery, and if you have devices that are plugged into here, you will also have their battery information appear there, at least if they support that. Accessibility was apparently a big focus for Elementary OS 8, which is nice. It's unfortunate that a lot of these accessibility features don't work well with Wayland yet. I have big hopes for the new accessibility framework that GNOME is developing. It's gonna be cross-desktop, so it's gonna work with every other desktop if they decide to implement it, and it's gonna work with Wayland, but for now, if you want accessibility, good accessibility, you're gonna have to use the classic session of Elementary OS. Now, as per the base of Elementary OS 8, it is Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, so it has the same kernel, it has the same drivers, it has a relatively modern kernel for now, and modern stack for now, and it will obviously benefit from all the security patches and all the things that Ubuntu LTS gets, including the hardware enablement stack. Pipewire is now the default for anything related to sound, and driver management has now been rolled inside of the system settings. Notably, if you have NVIDIA GPUs, you will need to go there to install the drivers in here. The LTS base is no longer the semi-issue that it was before, especially since you have Flatpak apps, so everything will be up to date if you do use Flatpaks, and the entire desktop for Elementary OS and their default apps are going to be updated on a hybrid rolling release model, meaning you don't have to wait for a major version of EOS to get your update. So the Ubuntu LTS base for now is fine. In 2.5 years, if you really rely on the repos, it's gonna feel pretty old, but also you have Flatpaks, and if you really need a brand new cutting-edge dev environment, you have distro containers to do just that. Now, in the end, Elementary OS 8 felt like a pretty small update for 2 years of work, but that is mostly because a lot of the work you're seeing here, including all the default apps, this work has been ongoing. The music player has been developed during the EOS 7 cycle. The file manager received updates. There's also the fact that the Wayland Session took a lot of time to actually finish. You had to redevelop a compositor, or at least rebase on a recent GNOME one and re-add a bunch of patches. You had to develop the session switcher in the login screen. You had to develop a brand new dock for it to work, changing the various libraries that Elementary OS apps rely upon. There's a lot of work needed here that isn't really all that visible, but it's still there, and it exists, and it took a lot of time. Like, seriously, Linux Mint doesn't have a Wayland session as accomplished as what Elementary OS has currently. XFCE doesn't have a Wayland session at all. Budgie, no Wayland session to be found anywhere either. And the stuff like Mate is probably 5 years away. Even KDE and GNOME only really finalized their Wayland sessions this year. So the work here from Elementary OS has been pretty awesome. Now, in the end, Elementary OS is still a small distribution and a small desktop, at least in terms of the number of people working on those things. And they're trying to do a lot. They're trying to build a competent app center and their own Flatpak remote. They're trying to build their own UI guidelines and app ecosystem. They're building their entire desktop and their entire default app set. It's a lot of work. And I think it still offers something special in terms of polish, in terms of the features, the simplicity of it all, and how focused they are on trying to make things work as well and as intelligently as possible. It's not for everyone, just like GNOME isn't for everyone or KDE isn't for everyone, but it does have a specific goal. Now, whether it can catch up to what GNOME has been doing, to what KDE has been doing, or even to what Cosmic has been doing, that remains to be seen. Is the Elementary OS niche going to be taken by GNOME, which has caught up in terms of app ecosystem and polish, and it also has extensions? Maybe. Will Cosmic be the good bridge between Elementary OS and KDE, for example, and drain some EOS users? I don't know. What I'm sure of is that EOS 8 is a solid distro. If you liked Elementary OS, you will still really enjoy this update. It brings you into the modern age, basically. And if you didn't like EOS 8, well, why are you even watching this video in the first place? You should watch this segue to our sponsor instead. It's Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that run with Linux out of the box. They actually pick the hardware because it's very compatible with Linux. They write drivers that they are in the process of upstreaming so everybody can get access to them, but in the meantime they have repos where you can get those drivers to make sure that most distros run well on their hardware. I only use their stuff these days. This entire channel is run on one of their laptops, and all my video gaming is done on one of their desktops. They have plenty of options for any use case, for any price point. So click the link in the description. If you need a new computer, you want to support Linux, you want to support a company that supports Linux development, it's all there. Just click the link. In the meantime, thank you all for watching the video. You know, all the usual YouTube buttons, click them all to make sure that the video gets propped up by the algorithm and this channel can keep surviving. And if you want to make sure that it keeps surviving, I have plenty of good perks for Patreon members and YouTube members down in the description of the video. You know how things work. Go check it out. It's $1 per month at the base tier. It's really worth it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!